The Game Boy Color can be extruded mainly. Keep in mind that because we don't see the back, you only need to roughly represent what's going on here, unless you want to fully build it out, which is always a good exercise. But for the requirement of the project, the back is not necessary. I would say one of the more tricky things is this bevel running all the way around. I think that can be done with a sweep. Um, but yeah, there's some good details here in the buttons, making sure there's enough spacing in the slider here, and like noticing the screen is a bit lower from this gap here. Um, so the master sketch is basically a front view of it. This is just judging by eye. I have the arcs down here. The fillets can be put in later. So I believe the step is really to just extrude this. Um, the back, I think I did as a separate piece. Okay, it is merged. And this is all judging by eye. With your measurements, I'm sure this will be more accurate. But this is what I mean about the back can be simple, right? This is just a simple side cut to get that kind of bump out shape. And then putting a fillet on there kind of gets it close. Um, you'll notice when I did this extrusion here, I forgot to mention, I put in a sketch fillet using this tool um, to get those curves down there. But the next thing I'd like to show is the bevel running around the edge. As you might have guessed, it can be done with a sweep. So this is how I have it set up. This is just like let's call it a piece of cheese. I have it here aligned with, I believe I set this line to be offset in the master. And this is what is driving the wedge shape. So basically I am aligning a vertical line on this point from the master, right? So if you have a front orthographic of the Game Boy, you can draw a vertical line tracing that. And basically what this line wants to do, it wants to correspond with where this wedge touches this top surface. So we can do that by selecting these two and telling them to be coincident, but then selecting the point and the top edge and telling it also to be coincident. And then of course we want to set this to be for construction. The reason we have the wedge bigger than it needs to be, I mean, it would probably still work if it was like line to line, but sometimes when you do things like this in SolidWorks, sometimes it leaves like weird little bodies and stuff. I have found it's generally a good habit and practice to just kind of like overcut the item you're trying to cut to make sure that it all gets carved away. Sometimes SolidWorks has errors if things are like too close or there's not enough space. So yeah, that's the setup. Gonna X out of that since I already have this how I want. So to do the sweep, I'm going to load the sweep command. For the train, I'll choose the wedge. And for the track, I'm going to use the edge around the Game Boy, and we'll see if this works. So to select disjointed edges, I have to right click and then say Selection Manager, and then work the way around the model. And then check the box. Yeah, this is the only place where there may be an issue is if the wedge is too long, this corner may fail if this is too small. And I'm realizing now that I did a positive sweep. This should be a sweep cut actually. So I'm going to exit out of this and load sweep cut. So that's my mistake. And just reconstruct the selections here. This could also potentially be done with this chamfer command, but I think the sweep is going to offer more control. And it looks to me like it's pretty good. So I think that's how I would do it. As far as like the other details go, I want to talk about the Nintendo logo. If you review, it is possible to import a vector file. So I tried searching for Nintendo logo vector. I haven't actually downloaded any of these. There's a good website called Brands of the World that used to have, or that does have vector of many logos, but when I search Nintendo, a lot of them are unavailable, unfortunately. Now, if you can't find one of these, maybe like a PNG that you live trace in Illustrator would work. You can import, let's see, you can save out from Illustrator, you can save out a DWG file by exporting it. And SolidWorks can open a DWG file. So here's an example of a Paisley pattern. So once you have your Nintendo logo vector from Illustrator, you can go to File, and then Open. And then here I'm going to navigate to this AI import. And when this pops up, the settings you want is import new part as 2D sketch and uncheck the import as reference. You want to bring it in just like this and say, I think you can just immediately say finish. Just say yes if you get that pop up. So yeah, here's an example of what it might look like. You can simply drag and like edit copy and then go back to your main part and like top plane, or even sketch directly on this face if you want. You know, edit, paste. Now the one thing you can do is select all of this, like the logo, is to make sure it doesn't, because it's all going to be blue and undefined. If you select it all and right click, there's an option here at the top that looks like an A with an asterisk. If you select that, it's called making it into a block. You can think of it as the equivalent of like a grouping in like Illustrator. So now it's all attached together and it won't get ruined. And then you can, you know, change the size here to scale it by selecting the block and just typing it in to this dialog box in the parameters as needed. So this model will be an exercise in extruding repeatedly. But I mean, extruding is a powerful tool, and you can still get complex and interesting shapes with it. This one, because of the like shape of the form, it would be beneficial, if possible, to have an orthographic view, but also to set up multiple master sketches. So to have a side view, a top view, and a bottom view. So I'll show you what I have here. So I started with half of the front view. So here's the top part. I put the origin where the trigger is. It's up to you where to put the origin. That just felt natural to me. It could also be at the base. That's what I tend to do too when I can't decide. And based on that, I also just inserted a plane here at the bottom. So, you know, to make that plane, it's insert reference geometry plane. And then I selected this line and this dot. So now we have a foot, so to speak. I don't think there's anything special about this master sketch. This is just coincident to the origin and horizontal. The next sketch I made is the side view. So this has some references to the original. So for example, the trigger is centered on here on the origin. So this is that line has a ruling of being a midpoint on the origin. This one too is, I can recreate this. I basically took a line, vertical line in this orientation, selected it and selected this endpoint and told it to be coincident. And this way, now the base is attached to this first master. In that same technique I did by creating a line and telling it to be coincident, I did it with this line here and this line here, so that it kind of, this corresponds then to this front shape. The rest of this is sort of just judging by eye. This line 2 is corresponding to, I think, this point here. So if you have multiple masters, I tend to let the first one be the driver and attach the following ones to that original, if that makes sense. Here you can see I'm setting up the texture in the button. All we need is just one V. Let's look at this again. Yeah, it looks like there's some texture in here. So this can just be an extrude cut or like a pattern before this is extruded to make that. Then last but not least, we have the base footprint. Now the chamfer, this bevel in the image along here, I would put this in later using the chamfer command. You'll also notice that this is all being done in halves, and that's definitely what I would recommend for this model. So there's a couple ways to go about this. Let's see, let me look at this again. You know, you can extrude the foot up and then cut it from the side, and maybe that's what we'll do. But there's going to be a series of extrusions, so I think I'm just going to start with my gut. So I'm going to create a new sketch on this bottom plane, copy over the bottom master, close it off, load my extruded base. In this case, I want to go connect it to the master. So I'm going to say up to vertex or endpoint and just click where the handle ends and give that a check mark. Let's see, then I'm going to take a right front plane sketch. So selected the front plane, Alt-S to go to sketch world, and then Alt-N to flip it so I can see it normally. And then I'm just going to right click and say select chain to select this rectangle. And then same thing here, right click, select chain to select that rectangle, convert entities. And then this one I will do an extrude. And once again, I'm going to attach the extrude to the master by saying up to vertex and going to this point here. I think merging is okay here because I think we do want this to merge with, we want this bottom plate to merge with the handle. And then, last but not least, on the top plane, I will copy over this, and this one I'm going to select manually because I don't actually want the whole chain. I'm going to start with this here, and let me look back to the image. So it looks like there's several extrusions here. There's one that's kind of like a ring along the outside, and then there's this like gray interior body. So I'm going to start with what I see as the gray interior body. And I'm going to extrude this closed shape, this time up to surface. And I want this to merge with this. This will be sort of the gray body here. Now, it might have made sense to go back in this sketch and put in, you could put a sketch fillet in here. My reasoning for putting it in the sketch is that way we can use the sketch as an offset to create this kind of blue piece around here. So I might just put these two in. I don't know if we want them to be equal. Again, this is all just a rough guide. You can judge for yourself, you know, proportionally, dimensionally, what makes sense. So I guess since I'm still on this topic here, I think what I would do is create a new sketch on the front, on this face. We can do that because it's flat. I mean, you could also still stay with the top plane. I guess that's probably better practice, to be honest. And here I'm going to say select, I'm just going to select all this entire face and say convert entities. And what it does is it gives me a trace of that entire face. But I actually don't want these inner lines. I only want this outer one. And what I'm trying to make here is this blue portion. And I'm noticing now that it runs in between here. So maybe I do want to leave this. And that means all this spacing and stuff needs to change, like down in here. So just, these are things the master can maybe edit later, the master sketch. So I'm going to leave this as just a series of lines and not a closed shape. And then I'm going to go to features and go to extrude. And you'll notice that the thin feature is checked. You may get an error asking you if you want to close the shape. If you get that, just say no. And again, here I'm going to say up to surface. If these like settings of up to surface and vertex are confusing, you can definitely do this with blind extrudes. My reasoning for doing this, though, is as you make changes, things will update. This is, again, sort of think about the robust Jenga tower. And this one, we don't want this to merge. I might even argue, okay, no, never mind. I was going to say there's sometimes like these kind of like shell shapes are just a little bit taller than the face on the inside. But no, I think it'd be like enough to, if we, just for the sake of this tutorial and example, throw on a really thin fillet here just to visualize then what this gap looks like. And then to put one on this edge as well. And I think this will help the render. But actually, now that I think about it, this edge, if we go back to the image, it looks like it has a bevel on it. But yeah, so maybe instead it would be something like this chamfer command. And again, take all of these like details with a grain of salt. This is more an illustration than an exact representation. But I'm noticing that there is a bevel here, something like this, of this nature. Yeah, so now this bottom handle part, this is what I was saying before. We can take sort of a front sketch here, front view sketch, and copy these over. So selecting those manually. T for trim, I'm going to cut these away. Sometimes I think we need a vertical line here. Since this feature ends inside of the body, the cut would not work. If I plan to cut with just these lines here, you need to make sure the lines completely pierce the body. And actually this one's probably not necessary. We're just really kind of scooping out this trigger area. So I'm going to go to features here and say extruded cut and say through all both. Now we just want to look at where this arrow is pointing, and I'm going to flip it. Did that work? Or no, flip side to cut. There you go. And then check this box. Now there is a fillet on here, so here's where I might put in a manual fillet. Again, judging to, I guess in this case I am judging by eye. But yeah, all the more reason why it's helpful to have orthographics on this. And then like I mentioned, let me look back on this. Okay, yeah, there's a fillet on the bottom too, but this top part is definitely a bevel. So here's what I mentioned. I would use this chamfer command. And there's different ways to run this. You can say like distance and angle. You can say distance and distance, in which case you might want it to be asymmetric. But this is the standard is distance and angle is kind of the default that it gives. Sometimes I find the distance and distance is easier to set, but you can play with those two settings. And again, here just totally judging by eye. I don't stand by any of these numbers. Yeah. Now, obviously, like, yeah, fill at the bottom. There would be a split here. I think the last thing I want to show is just the trigger. So what I mentioned from the side view would be I would copy this from the master. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select this, and I'm going to click on linear sketch pattern. And it defaults to patterning in the x-axis, which is what we want. So we can just set the number here. But we can also set the distance. And now, like, instead of, you could take the time to trim this all out, but you could also just simply click on extrude. And in the selected contours option, just click in here. It's like a slightly easier step. And then obviously extrude this trigger in here. Some of maybe the other complicated things are like the lens in here. The lens can be done if you select this face and shell this, it'll hollow it out. And you could do one of a couple things to get the lens out. You could select the top face. Okay, yeah, let's see. The lens is actually a lot smaller here. So here's how I would do it. I would make a sketch on this face. I would pull only these 3 lines from the master, set them to be for construction, and then just set an offset entities. And let's say it's something like this. We can put a line in here to kind of cap it off. Now again, here's an opportunity. You could either do sketch fillets. I think this is my gut is telling me I would use sketch fillets in here in this case. Now the command I would use here is I would exit the sketch, and the command that I would use is called split. And what split does, because I selected a sketch, it's loading it here. It basically, it's a line-to-line split of a body. So here to split this, I need to click in this box and just simply click in the middle of this face. And here it's giving us a different color for it. And then check that box, and now it's split. Now it's separated out. The weird thing with the split command is it does not consume the sketch. The last thing I would do is select this body, or sorry, you don't need to do this. I'm just illustrating a point, and make it transparent. And now we can see, what that might look like. Now it looks like there's like different depths and stuff here, so just get all those details. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. I would also maybe you could also use the split command to split this bottom cap off as something quick. Cool. Yeah, hope that helps. So in studying this form, I'm interpreting it as 2 pentagons that are interchanged on each other. And I'll show you what I mean in CAD. And once you figure out the main body, the resulting pieces should kind of fall into place, hopefully. So like the center cap here, this is just a revolve. This is a sweep with a fillet. Although now that I say that, it looks like this is tapering, so maybe it's a sweep until about here, and then it's a loft from this point to this point. And this would be a surface loft, and I'll show you how I did that. So I started by bringing in the picture. It's a good enough like starting point as it is, but an orthographic would of course be better. You can see here the master is actually quite simple. It's basically, I'm just marking the heights of where the points are here, and then like getting this curve in and starting to look at like the sweep path over here. The next thing I did is I put in 3 planes, and I'll show you how I did one of them. So this plane here, basically I'm marking the points of where the intersection happens. So here's the bottom point part of the intersection. So here, to just walk back, what I did, as I said, insert reference geometry plane. The first reference I picked is this line, and it defaults to coincident. We actually want it to be perpendicular. And then the next reference that I selected was this endpoint here. And then I did it again with this one. So that's how I made those two. I think this last one, let's see, I made one on the top. So I started by lofting a pentagon from this top plane, plane 1 to plane 2. And again, this is just my reading on the form, that the point of the pentagon is facing forward and the flat part is facing backwards. I based the size of the pentagons on the master sketch on this back line here. To make a pentagon in a sketch, the command you want is this one up here. It's the polygon tool. If you click on it, the default is 6. Obviously, you want to change this to 5. This is obviously circle inside or outside. Wherever you click, you basically draw a circle with lines on the side. And you can, I believe you can rotate it. Or it's not rotating for me now, so maybe this one came in. Let me take a normal 2 view and see if I can rotate it. Oh, it's not letting me. Maybe if it's here. Yeah, there you go. If the middle's anchored, it rotates. I just set this to be vertical. Or I think actually what I did, the sketch we're looking at, is I set this line to be coincident, again, using this back line from the master. So I'm just going to exit out of this so I don't ruin the sketch. But yeah, basically I used this line to guide this loft. And then the loft is pretty straightforward. It's literally just sketch to sketch. No other commands in here. I did the same thing for the bottom. So I lofted. Now the main difference here, the critical difference that I realized, at least, yeah, in my opinion, is that the pentagon is facing the opposite direction for this bottom piece. And this is how the kettle gets its geometry by my reading. So this one is a loft, and this size was a little bit more ambiguous. I created this line here. You can see, I think if I split up this loft, what that does is it kind of just shows the orders of the sketches. So I started by just sketching a pentagon that looked like it was roughly the size of the base of the image. And then I created this line here from this endpoint to this intersection here. I believe, and I think that'll be more clear after the loft. And then here what I did is, so these 2 points, the tip of this pentagon and the edge of this first loft, told me the size of this next pentagon. And this was an imperfect solution. I'll show you why in a minute. So the reason why it's important that this line intersects is these need to come to a point, and that is what creates these points down here. Now, the reason this is imperfect, I kind of thought that this might perfectly align, but the solution, you can see it doesn't, it stops short, is what I simply did is I just used this command here. Where is it? The move face command. I selected this top face, and here you can just put in a value up until it crosses, until you get this top point. It really doesn't matter. I went way beyond it. Now, the next thing I did is I cut away. I used both bodies to cut away from each other using a surface trick. So I went to my surfaces tab here, and I clicked on offset surface. And we actually don't want to do an offset, we just want it to be 0. So we're basically copying all of these faces, these 5 faces, I think this is what I started with. But anyway, you select the 5 faces on either piece and check this box. And then here we have a new surface. It's basically, again, just copying these faces. And I used cut with surface to cut away at the body. So you want to pay attention to which way this arrow is pointing. If you need to flip it, you click on this. And then the body that we want to cut is this bottom one in this case. And that cut that away. But I'm going to suppress both of these. I forgot the order on which I did it. I don't think the order matters. Okay, so I did it bottom first. So same thing, surface offset, cut with surface. And then I did the same thing on the top. I selected all these faces, I believe. Yeah, I don't think the order matters. Here, let's look at this surface. Yeah. And then I cut away. And then the last thing I did is to make the main body is I used this combine tool. It's also under here in features, combine. If for some reason you don't see it, you can search for it in the commands. And basically you just select the 2 bodies and then click the checkbox, make sure it's on add. So that's what this is here. Now, the last thing I want to show is the spout. So I did the move face trick again at the top. This is to just get this taller so that we can cut this line. Without the move face, you can see it stops short. So I moved it up above, and then I moved it, sorry, that was a quick transition. Moved it longer, cut it with a line. Now the next thing I did is I put a sketch on this face. We can sketch on this face because it's flat. So sketch a line. And then what I did is I sketched a line from this corner down to here, visually to like whereabouts this blend starts. Now once we have this line, I used a feature called split line. I think I have it, for me I have it here, but if you can't find it there, it's definitely under surfaces, curves, and split line. And what this does is you just select the face. We already have the sketch loaded in here. It basically creates an edge on that face. So here you can see it added this line on this face here. Now, the next thing I did is I created a surface loft. So here, let's look at it. Now, a surface loft works very similar to a body loft, but I'm going to split this up and we'll look at the individual sketches, how the orientation was in. So it actually looks like the order in which I did this is I'm going to hide these 2 up here for now. I made these 2 sketches first. This one here, I think, yeah, it corresponded to the master. So this first sketch, which is this line, I created it on this face, corresponds to the master. So it comes up to this point. The next sketch, it's similar. The master had this arc, but you can see it's off. It didn't end up where the body is. So I created a new arc from this point, tangent to this line, and that sketch is on the front plane. After that, that's when I created this split line. So this sketch in here is a connection of this point to where this arc intersects down here. So now these are the elements which I used to make the surface loft. So in the surfaces tab, I loaded the loft surface command. I selected the, let's see, I'm lofting this line to this sketch. And here you can see the gray bar is misaligned. And if we drag that down, it fixes it. And then for guide curves, I selected this. And the other thing I want to do is for the start constraint, I want tangency to face. Now, depending on the order in which you pick this, it may be the end constraint. Whichever start or end corresponds to this line is the one you want. It'll be clear because here you don't see tangency to face. It's just not an option because it's the sketch. So find whichever dropdown has tangency to face and you want that one. Now it is important that the correct face is selected. You don't want the inside one. I would say next face. You want this outside one because we want it to blend, like peel from the blue up into this yellow. And then I just checked that box. But I'm going to delete this because I already created it. So that's just showing you how I did that. Let's see, what did I do next? Oh, okay, yeah. So it was helpful to build this in 3D or, full body to get the lofts and the pentagons. What I did next is I just used the right plane, or sorry, the front plane here, to just cut this body into half. Because the challenge with surfaces is once you go into surfacing, you have to go back from like a sheet of paper to a piece of clay. You have to give it volume. So I decided to take a slightly different path here, which is to actually revert this main body into surfaces to blend this. So I started by splitting this in half. And again, I did that by going to the cut with surface and then selecting the front plane, making sure the arrow is pointing the right way, and then clicking the green check. Then the next thing I did is in the surface command, I went to delete face. And basically, I just deleted these three faces. And what this does, this is a solid body, it's a piece of clay, but the minute that these three faces are deleted, now it's just like folded paper, basically. The next thing I did after deleting the faces is I mirrored the components. So that's just simply in the feature here, it's a mirror command. And that's, you want to select bodies to mirror. If bodies is misleading, you can also select surfaces with that. Now that we have all of our form here, the next thing I did is we want to knit the surfaces together. The blue lines means there's an edge, so I go to surfaces, I go to knit, and just basically select all these disjoint parts and check this box. The final thing to do, now there's a couple ways to make this into a solid body. You could use the filled surface here to select the top. And actually, if you go this route, I would do this before the knit. And there's a checkbox on the knit to make a solid body, so this would make it back into a piece of clay. The option I opted to go with, I went with thicken, where you simply just select this. If for some reason the thicken command doesn't work for you, I would go with that other option I just mentioned. Now the reason why thicken is not as ideal is you can see like some weird resulting geometry happens here. But basically it's as advertised. It takes the surfacing and just gives it volume. It just offsets it inwards or outwards, depending on what you want to go. But I think inwards would be the better option here. The way that I attempted to fix this kind of weird geometry at the top is I basically just cut it away. So from a side view, I think this is from the master sketch, but I'm realizing now we maybe want this a bit lower. So that way we now have a cleaner top edge here. Yeah, and that's the main form. Again, this back portion from the file, I would loft this, or sorry, I would sweep this handle. It'd probably be like a U shape that gets swept and up, and just putting like a generous fillet here. If the sweep doesn't look right, I would stop the sweep short and create a new plane here and do a loft to get this last portion.